everybody. This is One-on-One Nightly here on this Wednesday evening. I'm Jimmy Sullivan. Dylan Balsamo is with me. Alex Walls is our producer, as always. Dylan, we have a lot to get into, and something rare happened before our show tonight. We took our rundown, we modified it very heavily, because we've got some breaking news to get into.
Well, it's very interesting, and before we get into this breaking news, which I'm sure those who care have probably already heard about it, but at the end of the day, we did our prep early in the morning, and we were talking about, maybe we'll talk about this. Things were not really solidified yet, but we had somewhat of a plan. And then, what was it, an hour ago? We went, scrap that. We gotta start over again. So let's see what happens tonight. But I'm excited.
I was going to say, we'll see what happens tonight even before this happened. But that being said, our breaking news at this hour, Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN had it first. Russell Westbrook is a Washington Wizard. He has been traded from Houston to Washington. The Rockets will be getting John Wall, a 2023 first-round pick, in return. This is a fascinating move. The Wizards last year were in the bubble for about 10 minutes. They did not formally make the playoffs. The Rockets were in the playoffs, got bounced unceremoniously by the Lakers in the Western Conference semis in 5 games. Dylan, just your initial reactions to this trade, a real blockbuster in the NBA. John Wall has not played in nearly 2 years. He goes off to Houston. Russell Westbrook, after just 1 year with the Rockets, moves over to Washington in the Eastern Conference, which, as we know, near the bottom, Wizards could wind up getting a playoff spot out of this.
Absolutely. Well, for one thing, that's the thing about the NBA is that no team is. There are maybe 2 or 3 teams that are truly out of the playoff picture. Most everybody else, whether you're good or not, you got a shot at the playoffs in some way, shape, or form. But at the end of the day, what's interesting about this trade is that, and we were talking a little bit about this before the show, is that these are 2 teams where something clearly needed to be fixed. Something needed to happen in order to improve the team. But to be honest, I couldn't tell you in either scenario what exactly needed to happen. So I guess this trade, which is truly out of nowhere, of the Rockets who I thought were going to be traded this week, it was not Russell Westbrook. This does really feel like both of these teams are just rolling the dice and seeing, we might as well try this.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at it that way. And you emphasized the last-minute nature of this trade. Adrian Wojnarowski, who I referenced before, tweeted this out shortly after breaking the news. The 2 GMs, Tommy Shepard of the Wizards, Rafael Stone of the Rockets, who just took over for Daryl Morey, had not talked in weeks about this deal. One called the other this afternoon. They had a deal done in a few hours. So, hey, who knows? Who knows? I want to read you a few numbers here that I quickly put together before our show started. So, John Wall, of course, has not played since December 29th, 2018. He is expected to be ready for the start of the season, but still, that's almost 2 years. So that is a big wild card in this trade. So because of that, we'll start with Russell Westbrook. He's 32. He played for the Rockets last year. It was not a great fit with James Harden. If you look at the usage numbers for Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal, because this is going to be what this hinges on for the Washington Wizards. Russell Westbrook had a usage rate last year, even next to James Harden, who is maybe the most heavily used player in the NBA in terms of offensive possessions. He's always at or near the top.
Certainly.
34.4% for Russell Westbrook was his usage rate. Bradley Beal's usage rate, without John Wall, mind you, Bradley Beal was far and away the best player on the Washington Wizards. His usage rate was 34.4%. So what I am saying is something here probably has to give. And if we've seen anything in his career, Russell Westbrook is not terribly likely to give. So I don't know how this is going to go, but that makes me extremely nervous about it from the Washington point of view, that you have a high usage rate guy who's very inefficient next to a guy in Bradley Beal who's a budding superstar who is 6 years younger. I don't know. That gives me some pause, but then there are other parts of it that I sit there and I say, okay, maybe this could work. But my prevailing thought is that I really don't think I like this for the Wizards.
Yeah, if you're Bradley Beal, you kind of got to be throwing your arms in the air, being like, "What do I have to do to get what I need?" He must. I can only imagine how frustrated he is right now. Because Westbrook has not been producing at the level that he was at one point in his career, and even if he was, I would still be kind of disappointed if I was Bradley. So there's certainly that to take into account, that he's probably not happy right now. But also, this is another thing we mentioned right before the show, which is in the way this trade came about, it's almost like the two sides saw these two as equal to each other. Like they were the two missing puzzle pieces, with the exception of the way in the future draft pick that the Wizards gave up to Houston. And to be honest with you, and just from the stats you read alone, the numbers don't lie. They are not equals, really, in any kind of way. So that is the part that really confuses me. And maybe there's more work to be done in both of these front offices that will make this a little easier of an equation to understand and to dissect with our eyes. But as of right now, this doesn't really make any sense to me.
Yeah, and let's move over to Houston now, because fascinating move for them. You referenced it at the top. If there was a Rockets player you thought was going to be traded imminently, you might not have initially said Russell Westbrook. You might have said James Harden. And James Harden obviously is still a top flight player in the NBA. There's been rumors about him going to Brooklyn. That could still happen. Who knows? It doesn't look like, this is according to Tim McMahon of ESPN, it does not look like anything's going to happen before the season opener. That's on December 22nd, which is 3 weeks away. But let's look at the fit here next to James Harden, because I think it's interesting to remember that the best basketball James Harden has played in his career was when he was next to Chris Paul in 17, 18, and 19, even though Chris Paul was kind of compromised that year. Mm-hmm. It was the year he won the MVP. They were just uber efficient. The team had a great year. It took the Warriors to Game 7 of the conference finals. John Wall is a lot more like that kind of fit than Russell Westbrook was. They traded for Russell Westbrook because they knew that the CP3 James Harden thing was not going to end up in a championship. Because at the end of the day, that's what everybody's going for. The Rockets thought they had something there. Chris Paul started to get hurt, go on the downside of his career. They traded him to OKC. He found a renaissance, but it wasn't going to work in Houston. Just was not going to. Yeah. So they traded for Westbrook. They said, let's try something different. It didn't work out. So now they trade him to Washington, albeit that's a different front office. We don't know what John Wall is going to be exactly. But if he can come back and he can be 80 to 90% of the player he was pre-injury, I actually think this could work out really well for Houston. And I think there are a lot of really intriguing possibilities for them, for Steven Silas, who is a first-year head coach of the Houston Rockets, and for Raphael Stone. This is his first big move that he has made as the GM. I would say kudos to him, because my initial reaction is I think the Houston Rockets won this trade.
I'm totally with you on that one. I don't disagree with anything in particular that you said. One thing is for certain, whether the Rockets end up winning this trade or not, I think they're going to come out the victors of it in the end, if that makes any sense. Because if you're James Harden right now, and there was a chance that you were not going to be playing in Houston this season, and now if you get rid of one of these guys, you can't really get rid of them both. Because what is that saying to your fan base? So, there's a good chance the Harden's going to stick around now. And if I were James Harden, this might be a much better scenario than it looked like a week ago for him, 24 hours ago for him, 12 hours ago for him.
1 hour ago for him.
I was going to see how long you were going to let me.
You were just going to count it down, right?
But my point is, Harden's a star. He is undoubtedly one of the best players in the NBA. Is he ever going to have a year again like his MVP year? He might. I don't know. But at the end of the day, he's still a top elite player, and you got to cater to those guys. This is a league where you have your top player, and you build the team around them. And Russell Westbrook was just not that fit for the Rockets, not for James Harden's Rockets, if we want to put it like that. Jeter's Yankees, James Harden's Rockets, kind of like that. So if I'm James Harden, I'm thinking, oh, maybe I want to stick around in Houston. Maybe they care about me. Maybe they want to build this team around me because I'm a really viable asset to any team that has me. So if I'm James Harden, I'm thinking this might have been the right thing to happen to me.
Yeah, and when I say something like they won the trade, it's as much about subtraction as much as I hate to say that, because
Certainly.
don't get me wrong, Russell Westbrook's a great player. He's done amazing things, but it was a square peg in a round hole in Houston. It just didn't work. And you have a Rockets team that is in transition that I don't think is looking to spend at the levels it has in the past. You know, they've got Tillman Fertitta, who's the owner, who I think is a Golden Nugget franchisee or something like that. And he has indicated that they're not going to spend like crazy. They're not going to spend Steve Cohen dollars, for example, if that makes sense. Sorry, I had to sneak Steve Cohen into that conversation.
We'll talk more about that later in the show.
Yes, love me some Steve Cohen. That being said, it's interesting to look at this. And by the way, the NBA season is in 3 weeks, which I know is very quick. But it's, you got the preseason starting next week. Next Friday is the first night of the preseason, which is just unbelievable, really. But getting back to the matter of this trade, this move, and I think for Washington, can this work in the short term? Yeah, they've got shooters around. Bradley Beal, they had some encouraging performances in the bubble, mainly from Rui Hachimura, who was their first round pick last year. So they could be pretty good. They're in the Southeast Division, which is the division with the Miami Heat. Heat are probably going to win it again, and then I could see the Wizards finishing second in that division because it's Orlando, Charlotte, Atlanta. Yeah, their competition, beside for Miami, is not particularly stiff.
Yeah,
so yeah, and if they finish second in the division, they're going to make the playoffs.
Yeah,
I mean, barring anything insane, like 42-40 gets you the 6th seed in the East. So I think they'll take that. But I think as a long-term thing, I'll be interested to see how this goes for Houston. And again, we have no clue what John Wall has to give right now. That is such a huge wild card in this trade. And, Westbrook obviously still had some years on that contract. John Wall has a couple of years left on that contract. Ironically, John Wall's contract expires, and that coincides with the 2023 first round pick. I don't know if that's worth anything, but just $50 million coming off the books, and then they have the Wizards first round picks. That could work out. You never know.
That was probably the right move. But I want to talk about something that you just kind of touched upon there. Which is, for the most part, I won't say completely, because at the top we kind of know what's going to happen, mostly. But a lot of this Eastern Conference right now is up for grabs. I have no idea what's going to happen. Like 4 down in the East, it's not going to be the Knicks, but most anybody else, it could potentially be. So, if I'm the Wizards right now, I'm thinking, why not? Why not roll the dice here? I know I keep saying that, and I should get to Vegas sometime myself, but this is really it's a gamble I didn't see coming, still don't really understand, but there are people who know more than I do. So I'm thinking, if you're the Wizards, why not do this? And maybe there's more to come, like we were talking about earlier. But for now, we'll see what this was for.
And you just mentioned them, so there's another angle of this I want to touch on, and that's the New York Knicks, because they were perhaps more than any other team tied to Russell Westbrook.
Yeah.
And everybody thought, for God knows why, that the Knicks were just going to trade for Russell Westbrook because they're going to take out a bad contract, because that's what they do. And Leon Rose and the people at MSG, despite meddlesome ownership, have shown what I view to be remarkable restraint this offseason, almost stunning, when you look at it. It's not something you're necessarily used to saying with the New York Knicks, but they made good value adds. Austin Rivers, I think, is a good pickup. Are they going to be a playoff team next year? Probably not. Will they be better? Yes, because Tom Thibodeau does that in the short term.
Yeah.
Wherever he goes. But Dylan, I liked how the Knicks probably looked at this one like everybody else did. They saw possibly a steep acquisition cost for Russell Westbrook, and they backed away and they said, we're out of here. And look, I think they're in a lot better position for it, a lot of flexibility. And Dylan, I cannot believe I'm saying this out loud. The New York Knicks deserve a lot of credit here.
Sorry, I just got struck by lightning. I totally agree with you. Not only would it be a high acquisitional price potentially for Westbrook if the Knicks wanted him, but also the price of having him on your roster. He is a personality. And, New York is home to personality, but that doesn't mean you should go after every guy that has personality. It feels like the Knicks have been tied to every outspoken NBA player of the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. No, I'm kidding.
We're going to do that again.
We could keep going. And with the Knicks, it might stay accurate. But at the end of the day, I agree with you. The restraint the Knicks had by staying out of this. And, in fairness, it seems like they really didn't have a say in this. The trade ended up happening very quickly, and the Knicks were not in the room where it happened. They were not with the sausage when it was made. But nevertheless, I think this was a step in the right direction for the Knicks. This offseason has been pretty good for them so far. I think they had a very good draft, as good as they were going to have, quite honestly. And, there's still a little bit of time before the season starts. No one's expecting them to do anything this year. But if they can continue to step forward, as we expect them to, then they're meeting our expectations.
Yeah, and the expectations are low. The bar is on the floor almost at MSG. But it's fun who is a CAA guy before going to run the Knicks front office. Obviously, that sounds familiar. But it's funny when you look at some of the acquisitions they've made, you could trace it back to either CAA or the University of Kentucky. Now, I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, but it is strange. Does it matter at the end of the day? Probably not. I do like some of the guys that they went out and made moves for. Austin Rivers, I referenced. Nerlens Noel is a good energy guy, probably off the bench. I would think to mentor Mitchell Robinson maybe as much as anything. Who knows? But look, I mean, they're going to be bad next year, and I think we'll probably just have to accept that. I don't think they're a playoff team. And I think also to quickly touch on the other New York team, and that's the Brooklyn Nets. And they have been tied to James Harden for weeks. There have been reports about mutual agreements in place that couldn't be announced yet for one reason or other. And they may still get James Harden. Who knows? It looks a lot less likely now than it did 2 hours ago. But for Brooklyn, KD back, Kyrie back. Is that enough? Who knows? I will say they had a third star in James Harden. Things get a whole lot more interesting in Brooklyn. But Dylan, I'm not sure how likely that is now with what we have seen from the Rockets tonight.
Certainly. I'm thinking it's almost off the table at this point because, like we were talking about earlier, I think Harden might be a little more inclined to stick around in Houston now. He might want to advocate himself a little more as the guy in Houston because the floor is wide open for them now. Because now they can build around him without having Westbrook there. There's a little more wiggle room there. But, in terms of the Nets, it looks like it's not going to happen. And it would have been interesting if James Harden was a Brooklyn Net, but I don't think interesting always means good. I think the idea of having a three-headed monster of a team can sometimes work. We've seen it work. Our generation was raised on the big three in Miami. But at the end of the day, that's not always going to work. And especially with those three guys, this particular situation, the media capital of the world, three specific personalities, three guys who fight for the MVP. It just is all it's going to lead to is three guys who are going to fight for the ball. And that's really difficult when there's only one ball and there's only 48 minutes and there's only so many points that are going to be scored. The Nets might have almost been saved from themselves here. They got a lot of talent on that team. They got a culture that is improving. We've seen that over just covering this team as we have at FUV over the last few years. This is a team that the culture around the franchise is changing. And what you don't want to do is tamper with that too much that you're going to ruin a good thing. And maybe having Harden on the team was just a little too sweet.
Yeah, and throw on to the top of that Steve Nash, a first-time head coach. That's also interesting. I will say, I think I disagree with you on this because I think whenever you get a chance to take a big swing like this, I'm always more inclined to say do it and then live with it afterwards because, the window is now for the Nets. They got to do it in the next couple of years. And I think when you have a chance to make a move like that, you pull the trigger as long as you're not entirely pillaging the rest of your roster. So I think that's part of it as well. A lot going on in the NBA, to say the least. Preseason starting next week, which is really unbelievable considering it felt like the season ended about an hour ago. But we got a lot more to get into. We're going to get into some 3:40 on a Wednesday afternoon football and much more coming up next. Jimmy and Dylan taking you up until 10:30 on Twitter and YouTube. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Yo. We're talking about tonight, you can leave a comment on Twitter or do the same on YouTube. We will try to get to it in due time. Jimmy Sullivan, Dylan Balsamo with you. Leave your comments where I told you to leave your comments below. That being said,
we told you to leave them.
Yeah. I don't know. I have a hard time explaining the internet. I can't lie to you. But moving on, plowing ahead. We had a Wednesday afternoon football game today between the Ravens and Steelers. First time, I think, in history that's happened. If it's not the first, it's probably the second or third. Steelers get the win 19-14. They're 11-0. Frankly, the type of game that nobody really won. The Steelers had an injury to Bud Dupree one of their star defensive players tore his ACL, it is believed. Of course, he'd be out for the season if that happens. RG3 got hurt in that game. Marcus Peters left and came back. All were non-contact injuries. These teams obviously had an incredibly messy week of practice. This game was scheduled to be played last Thursday on Thanksgiving night. It got pushed back on 3 separate occasions, finally played today, almost a week later than it was supposed to be. Dylan, I'm not so much interested in the game itself, to be totally honest with you, because I watched it, honestly. But I will say it's a fascinating conversation. The NFL dealing with COVID in different ways, and you see a game like this that is postponed to unprecedented levels, but still technically played in the week it was supposed to be played.
Well, yeah, if I submit something at 11:59 when it's due at midnight, yeah, I got it in before it was due, but I did not do that with flying colors. Look, here's the thing. You talked about not wanting to talk about the game. I know I just mentioned this to you during the break. I'm at a point with football, specifically the NFL this year, where like I don't even want to talk about the game anymore. This is too weird of a season to even be worrying about that. The fact that this game happened 6 days after it was supposed to be played, and the potential was it could have gone longer. The NFL did not handle this season properly from the get-go, and we're seeing the results of that right now. The fact that we'll continue to have to push out games. The NFL's gotten pretty lucky with what they've been able to get in. Who knows when that luck is going to run out? But it came close in this game, a game that was supposed to be the Thanksgiving primetime game in a year where every football fan had no excuse to not be watching the game, because what else is there to be doing? The NFL could have handled this entire season better, and this game itself happening on a Wednesday afternoon, like it's flag football or something, is just a perfect example of the failings of the NFL this season.
I want to read you a roller coaster of a tweet from Adam Schefter last night, reporting on the Ravens being en route to Pittsburgh. These are his words, not mine. Baltimore's team flight is leaving. Game is still on. But the Ravens did have 2 more positive tests yesterday, per sources. It is thought to be 1 player, 1 staff. And in the words of one source, not unexpected and not a concern for the game. And I got a strange vibe from that. I don't know if you watch Succession, Dylan, but there is a running bit in there where there's an abbreviation, NRPI, no real person involved. And that is a little bit of the sense that I get in how the NFL is treating some of these COVID cases. And I don't say that to be glib. It's, okay, you had X number of cases. Is it enough to push back the game? And obviously, I'm sure there's concern for well-being of the players and staff and whoever else may test positive. But it honestly feels like you and I both know the NFL is getting to the end of the season, no matter what happens. But we're sitting here and they're just plowing ahead every week with cases. During the break, I got a notification on my phone that 2,650 people died from the coronavirus today. And look, this thing is everywhere right now. And we've, as a country, pretty much quit on stopping it. And guess what? It's going to infiltrate the NFL. It already has. And, I heard a stat on the Monday night game the other night. 1 team in the NFL has not had a positive case this season. It's the Seattle Seahawks. But that just goes to show you this thing is pervasive. It's everywhere. When you have cross-country travel and you're coming in contact with more people than probably are necessary, these are the things that are going to happen. And Dylan, as you said, you criticize the NFL, but these are the things that they are dealing with. And, they have been steadfast against doing bubbles or hub cities or models like that. But things are going in such a ridiculous direction. We saw the Ravens game this week. We saw the Broncos go out there with no quarterbacks on Sunday. And it's, as you said, it's hard to draw coherent conclusions from any of this because it's such a weird season and it just feels like it's being played through for financial considerations. It's going to continue to happen that way. But the health and safety protocols, I think you would agree with this, just are not working.
Yeah, here's the key word in that Schefter tweet that you read that got to me. These cases were, did he say expected?
He said not expected to like threaten the game or something like that.
Okay.
Because like that was, that was my problem with it. It was like that was the first thought. Like, okay, you have two cases. It's not the first thought is okay, are the players, all right. It's is it enough to affect the game on Sunday or whatever the case may be?
I just don't I just can't believe the lack of creativity in the NFL higher ups to not adjust this season so that it could be, if you want to get full season in, you can't have your regular schedule. The NFL schedule in terms of its usual, every 4 years you're going to play this division, you're going to play everybody from across. This was not a year where that was feasible, and we're seeing that every single week in positive cases, in delayed games, in the Broncos not going out with a quarterback on their roster. Are we out of our minds, people? I don't know. I turned into Seinfeld for a second, but the point remains. The NFL could have so easily done something that I don't think baseball handled. I don't think baseball handled the COVID precautions perfectly. But what they did do was adjust their schedule so you did not have to travel cross country. The 49ers came to New Jersey in September. What are that was such an easy adjustment if you want to have football. Is it going to be the legitimate season you want to have? No, of course not. Who cares? These are human lives we're talking about. It just boggles my mind at what little consideration was thrown into having any sort of irregular season.
Yeah. Well, I'll just give you the Arizona Cardinals. Arizona Cardinals played the New England Patriots in Foxborough last week. They're playing the Buffalo Bills in Arizona this week. They're playing the Giants in New Jersey the week after. That's, cross country, literally. And there's a problem when you're referencing Major League Baseball as like a model of how to do this. Major League Baseball season ended with a guy who had the coronavirus hugging his teammates and kissing the World Series trophy. So, and Major League Baseball did so well that they had a bubble with fans. So I don't even know what to tell you at that point. But all that aside, the NFL season, it's, and you're right to say that they've had very little effect in terms of the schedule. They moved around a couple games when the Titans had their outbreak earlier in the year. That feels like forever ago.
Yeah.
I mean, we knew this was going to happen. And sports leagues are trying to figure this out. And I think the one good thing you and I could probably both agree on is that we've got months left of this pandemic, not years. So I think that's one good thing to look forward to. But we're not going to hit any degree of normality until probably the spring at the earliest. And you've got leagues trying to figure this out. The NFL, they've got to figure out a Super Bowl. I mean, they seem to be against the playoff bubble, but it's getting harder and harder to figure out which teams can even have fans in the stadium now. So it's not like there's a home field advantage other than travel this year. And the NFL has to figure out how exactly they want to do the Super Bowl. Are they going to get to the teams in some kind of bubble environment before then? Who knows? But there's a lot to figure out. And, our gateway into this was the Ravens game. I also wanted to touch on the Denver Broncos. And I think these two situations illustrated how much the NFL is just making this up as they go along. So the Ravens had a bunch of cases, obviously. The game got pushed back nearly a week. I felt bad for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I really did. They wound up winning the game. They complained about it, which was maybe a little out of touch just with everything that everyone is dealing with right now. But I will say that the NFL seemed to be going out of its way more so to protect the Ravens, which I didn't think was wrong, than they have basically any other team. And the illustration of that is the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos had Jeff Driscoll, who is their backup quarterback, test positive for COVID at some point late last week. He apparently was in the quarterback room with all the other quarterbacks. They weren't wearing masks. All the quarterbacks got wiped out. Couldn't play the game. They had to play Kendall Hinton, who is a practice squad wide receiver. He went 1 for 8. They played the Saints. They lost big. It was a game with no quarterbacks, really. Taysom Hill was starting for the Saints.
Yeah.
And he's not a quarterback in the truest sense of the word. The Broncos went out there severely undermanned. Everybody knew it was going to happen, and then it happened. And Dylan, I just find a huge discrepancy between how that situation was handled, where the NFL said, hey, that's tough. You got to go out there and play. And how the Ravens situation was handled, where they sat there and said, oh, we'll wait as long as you need to go ahead and play. And for the record, I think they handled the Ravens situation better than they did the Broncos situation, but still, it's a pretty big discrepancy.
Yeah, it's the sense of like you said, there's no centralized sense of this is what we're going to do. It's the governing body is just the playing it by ear fleeing of the moment, which isn't going to work. But that's when I really start to have an issue with the fact that the NFL does not want to go into a bubble for any kind of postseason that they're planning. Obviously you and I do not have the money or the power to be anyone who would have that kind of say. And maybe that's why we're able to have, I would argue, a much more objective view of this situation. But whenever the NFL has been asked about doing a bubble, their answer does not seem like that's not feasible. It feels more like we don't feel like doing that. Well then don't have a playoff. I didn't spend Thanksgiving with my family this year, and you're talking about having a regular Super Bowl? Are you out of your what? It's not only insensitive, but it's just ready. It's stupid. It's stupid. I said it. Quite frankly, it really upsets me. Because this is such an American. Football is the American sport. It is our national central point almost. And they are completely botching this.
Yeah, and they've talked about a postseason bubble being impractical because of just how many people there are. So there's 14 playoff teams. There's however many people go with those teams. So, my answer to that would just be, all right, well, the Super Bowl is in Tampa this year. So make that a hub city. And, pick wherever in the, for the other conference. You put one conference in one place, another in the other place. You could go to the West Coast if you want. There's the new stadium in LA. If you just want to do that, that's fine. So you put, the NFC out there. You put the AFC down in Florida. And when, the team from the NFC goes and wins the NFC championship, there's 2 weeks until the Super Bowl. They fly across at some point, and, hopefully that mitigates things. And that way you've only got 7 teams on one side, 7 teams on the other, and it's not, like a huge number of personnel have to be in each place. And, what the NBA and the NHL showed us is that you can have those environments. The NBA we talk about more because it was a true bubble. The NHL was not a true bubble. And yet they went up to Canada, which was probably the best move they made, and nobody tested positive. So it can be done. It can be done. They just everybody needs to hunker down here for the last month of the regular season into the postseason. And look, I think they're going to get to the playoffs. I don't think we're going to see any major scheduling changes, to be honest, because I haven't seen them have a willingness to do that. So I just think we're plowing ahead. We're going full steam. First week of January, we'll see it for the playoffs. First week in February, we'll see it for the Super Bowl. And that's just going to be the way it is.
Yeah, it's painful to think about. The very small amount of regard for human life beyond a corporation that has gone into this process. I guess I can understand it, but quite frankly, I'm furious about it.
Yeah, and it's understandable. And COVID is everything right now. I know we talk about it a lot, and look, I get it. It's not fun to talk about, but with the proportions in which it's happening right now in America, you cannot physically avoid it. Just the way it is. Got more to get into next. We'll move over to the college side. A lot of stuff going on over there as well. We'll be right back. Back on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Jimmy and Dylan taking you up until 10:30. We're just talking about the NFL and coronavirus. We don't like talking about this, but move on to the college side, and they're dealing with the exact same thing. They have issues with it. Bunch of games get canceled every week. It's just what it is at this point. College game day is supposed to go to Coastal Carolina this week. That game is even in jeopardy. So it seems like literally nobody is immune to this. That being said, probably the biggest story in college football when it comes to coronavirus right now is Ohio State. They had last week's game canceled. They'd had a game earlier in the season canceled. This is important because the Big Ten started late. Big Ten has butchered almost everything that they've done with their response to this. But they started late. And they set in their rules that you had to hit a minimum of 6 games in the regular season to get to the Big Ten title game. That's relevant because Ohio State is at 4. And there are 2 games left in the Big Ten season before the December 19th Big Ten title game in Indianapolis. Dylan, this is a fascinating situation. It is not a guarantee Ohio State gets to those 6 games and makes its way to Indianapolis. We think if they play those 2 games, they're going to win. But not a guarantee that they play them. And in 2020, when we're dealing with these outbreaks and you're dealing with cancellations, we figured this would happen. But to see it happen to one of the best teams in the country is still pretty jarring.
Jarring. Quite frankly, it sucks. For any college football fan would tell you that much. And maybe they'll get in those 2 games. If they get in those 2 games, they're going to the Big Ten championship game. It's not much of a hot take, if you will. But if they don't, then I guess they won't. If the Big Ten's going to adhere to that set of rules, which perhaps they're going to, then they won't. But also maybe they won't adhere to those rules. This is a season where I'm honestly saying to myself, okay, who cares? If the Big Ten Conference wants Ohio State in that championship game and they didn't get to that number, Ohio State's going to get in that game. So I'm not incredibly concerned about that. But also, let's say the Big Ten sticks their guns on this, which I don't think they're going to, and sticks to that rule, then yeah, it's terrible for Ohio State. But of all the programs that are worrying about their future in a post-COVID world, Ohio State's not one of them. There are smaller schools that have much bigger problems than Ohio State not playing in the Big Ten championship game. So, if they get to play in that game, great. Great for every college football fan that wants to see them go up with the Titans like they are. But if they don't, you kind of just have to cut your losses and go, this was a crazy season anyway, and we can't pretend it's not.
Certainly, and let's also remember the Big Ten is playing an 8-game schedule. They were initially going to play no games this fall. They had thrown in the towel, and Kevin Warren, the Big Ten commissioner, has handled this in a questionable fashion. They had breakthroughs in like daily rapid testing that they thought were really going to change things in terms of the season being played safely. How much that level of testing has actually made an impact, at least in terms of containing the virus, very debatable. Have they been able to play more games because of it? Yeah, maybe. But, it was that. It was other things. I mean, Nebraska practically threatened to secede from the Big Ten. That was also part of it. But, it's fascinating because this is such a huge test. And do I think the Big Ten will somehow find a way to make this work? Yes. There are already people saying apparently Michigan is also dealing with a bad COVID outbreak right now. And again, it's worth emphasizing the foremost concern here is for the players, the coaches, the staff, whoever it is testing positive, that they get better and make a full recovery. But apparently Michigan is dealing with an outbreak now as well. Does not look like Michigan's going to play their game this week against Maryland. The next week's game is against Ohio State. That is debatable. There are people making incredible accusations on the internet about teams like Michigan waving the white flag and just using it as an excuse to say, all right, we're done, which is a hell of a thing to say, and you better be sure if you're saying it. But, if that game gets canceled, fascinating litmus test for the Big Ten. Do they stick to their guns on this? Dylan, what I think would wind up happening, it's not that Ohio State would go into the clubhouse with 5 games. What I think would happen is that they will move heaven and earth to find Ohio State a team, a game, somewhere the Big Ten is sitting there saying we're only going to play a conference schedule. They'll make an exception for Ohio State. Like, they will get this done. I really believe Ohio State's getting to 6 games come hell or high water.
No, I'm completely with you on that. The Big Ten has been, as you've said, questionable in the way they've gone about this year. I would argue most conferences have been questionable in the way they've gone about this season. The Big Ten, chief amongst them, will say. And something you brought up that I completely forgot about was Nebraska threatening to leave the Big Ten conference. Imagine being in the biggest conference in football that is not the SEC and threatening to leave because you want to play games during a pandemic. That whole idea is just so backwards. And and who knows if the Big Ten was not for nothing, who knows if the Big Ten was actually going to play this year if the sitting U.S. president had not gotten himself involved in this. We'll leave it at that. But
I forgot about that too.
Right? I can't, like, there's so much that happened with the Big Ten this year. Not to mention, this is also the best year Rutgers football had since leaving the Big East Conference.
Yes. By far.
It's mind-boggling. I can't believe that. And you and I both being Jersey guys, as our producer Alex Walls is, it's been a sight for sore eyes. But at the end of the day, I agree with you. The Big Ten is going to do whatever they have to do to get Ohio State into that game. And if their track record this season has been any indication, that's going to happen.
Yeah, and by the way, shout out to Rutgers. I was classmates at Bergen Catholic with one of their quarterbacks last week, so I was very happy to see that. I wanted to make a point about Nebraska. They were talking about leaving the Big Ten. A lot of weeks I watch them play, and I say maybe you should, because I mean they're having a brutal year. The program is not there. Like, they can't compete. That's the biggest problem. They're talking about playing games here. They wanted to get out there and compete, and it's not happening. Like, they're just not a good team. And I'm not going to say that they regret it necessarily, but they go out there sometimes and it's like, oh my goodness, what are you doing? Anyway, that being said, yeah, the Big Ten's a fascinating conference, right? You've got Michigan with Jim Harbaugh, really bad. You've got Rutgers having the best year they've had in a while, and they're 2-4. And you've got Ohio State sitting at 4 games, and Wisconsin already is not going to get to 6. On and on it goes. Just a fascinating college football season, fascinating Big Ten. College football playoff is going to go on. They're going to play it. They're going to finish it. I have confidence in that. That being said, let's move over to college basketball real quick. I don't know how you feel about this, Dylan. I think college basketball is probably the weirdest sport without fans. If you were to rate it on the spectrum, I would say soccer is probably the least weird because I think the broadcast networks have done a great job of not accentuating the fact that there's nobody there.
Certainly.
I was watching Duke Michigan State last night, and nothing in life prepares you for the sight of looking into the student section at Cameron Indoor and seeing cardboard cutouts.
So weird.
That will never not be weird to me.
And Duke and Michigan State playing is, every time it happens, a highlight on all of our calendars, which makes it really strange. The only thing that has prepared me for this college basketball season, quite frankly, is watching that last half of basketball that was played in the Big East tournament last season. I was out to lunch actually with my family. It was the last time we basically left the house before lockdown. We watched that game and we could hear it, and it was strange to hear. You could hear all the parents. So there was at least that. It was the closest I got to being ready for college basketball, which is a sport that is so I did not realize how dependent it was on the fans being there. I knew it was important, but I didn't realize it was that important before watching this year. And it is so peculiar. I mean, credit to college basketball to getting at least something to happen, because at least at Fordham, football's probably not playing until February, the earliest. And here we are, basketball is, for the most part, starting on time, with the exception of a few positive cases. So that's really peculiar. And I don't know how the rest of this basketball season is going to go. I don't know if teams are going to be playing 20 games. I just don't know.
Yeah, so we were talking. So Dylan and I are both technically still on staff at the Fordham Ram. I have been fired. But Dylan, you're the new managing editor. Congratulations on that. Alex Wolz, our producer, is the new sports editor. Congratulations, Alex. But we do a podcast, the three of us, with Andrew Posadas, who was just recently our managing editor. And we had the conversation, is it going to be over under 20 games for these teams? I think it depends. I mean, you talked about Fordham. The Fordham men's basketball team has had to cancel 3 games. They still have not played any. Their first game right now is scheduled for December 12th against Maine. And Maine is also on pause because of a positive test. Now, it will be interesting to see if the guidelines change, because I was reading today that the CDC has voted to change the quarantine time from 14 days to anywhere from 7 to 10, like if you get another negative test or something like that.
Yeah.
Not exactly sure how that works, but I think going from 14 to 10 is probably going to allow some more games to be played.
Sure.
And also, like, I was reading about it, and I'm obviously for stringent medical protocols, and it seems like something like a shorter quarantine was actually a long time coming. It's not like they woke up one morning and were like, this is really annoying the hell out of people, we need to make it shorter. I don't think it was that. I genuinely believe there's a science behind this, and you take the time from exposure, whatever. So it will be interesting to see that, because right now Fordham's targeting December 12th to get out of quarantine, and apparently they're going to get out of quarantine and play a game. I don't think there's a lot of coaches in America who are keen on that. No practice, get out, go play. I don't think that's going to play. I just don't. I mean, I've heard coaches, I think it was Kevin Willard from Seton Hall, was saying, if we have 2 weeks off of practice, I want to get another week of practice in before we even play another game. Yeah. Is that going to be an option this year? Probably not. It's tough. It's tough.
Yeah. And, speaking of Seton Hall, I don't know what the final of that game they had tonight against URI was, but they were down by 5 with a few minutes to go. So they could have used an extra day or two of practice. But yeah, if I was a college basketball coach, which surprise I'm not, but if I was, I'd want an extra week too. I'd want an extra 2 weeks actually. Can you imagine being in quarantine for 2 weeks and all you can do is just eat and do schoolwork and all that kind of stuff, and then you got to go play a Division I college basketball game? That's ridiculous. You might as well just make it an exhibition game so you have some kind of game played, but it doesn't have to count towards your regular season record. But at the end of the day, this is also a year where every team's gonna have to cut their losses and count whatever blessings they're gonna have. So obviously you have to play games on short practice. That would suck, really. But it is the nature of this weird beast of a season, and we, as the gatekeepers of sports history in the sports broadcasting world, will say, we'll be sure not to look at this season on the same pedestal as we do other seasons. And I hope most people working in college basketball in programs are will understand that I hope no one's job is going to be decided by their record in the 2020-2021 college basketball season, because that's just not fair to anybody. But it is the nature of the season, so who knows?
Yeah, and we were talking about Fordham. Yeah, look at this from Jeff Neubauer's point of view. They had a positive test at the end of October. They were shut down until about mid-November. They get 2 weeks of practice in. They're supposed to play Iona in the season opener. That gets canceled. They're supposed to play St. John's. That recently got canceled. Supposed to play Manhattan. That got canceled. And then get to the end of November. They're like, okay, well, we're finally hitting the practice court again. And you got to shut down for another 2 weeks. I mean, I don't envy that at all. Coaches are dealing with such a hard task this year. And yeah, we should mention while we're at it, we were supposed to bring you a Fordham women's basketball game tonight. They were supposed to play Manhattan.
Yeah.
Manhattan had a positive tier 1 test. We're not bringing you that game tonight. So yeah, that's going to be the nature of this season. There's going to be cancellations. That's the way it's going to go. How many games will end up getting played? Who knows? It's going to depend on how the country is doing. If certain areas are better than others, who knows? It's hard to look at it that way this season. But I will say, watch college basketball, man, it's weird without the fans. It's just weird. It's too much to get used to, and I don't think I'm going to. We'll move on to happier subjects after this, namely the New York Mets. We'll be right back. Back on one-on-one, another half hour for you, taking you up until 10:30. Jimmy and Dylan with you on this Wednesday night. Let's talk some baseball. We've had some news over the last couple of days, some signings going down. The Mets made a move for Trevor May, the Minnesota Twins reliever. And Dylan, we're talking about the big money here for the New York Mets. This is different. It's good, but it's different. And you look at the biggest names on the board, Mets could get any one of them. And this is a new and foreign feeling. I don't know what to do with it. I'm so happy.
It's peculiar, and I will tell you, this. Our viewers might not. I come from a split family myself. My mom's side of the family is Mets fans. My dad's side are Yankee fans. So I do kind of know what this feels like a little bit, because I've watched the Yankees do it. I've witnessed the Yankees do it. And it's odd to feel that the Mets can be in the running for anybody. And to be honest with you, had the owners been anybody but the Wilpons, they would have been the whole time, because they're a fun franchise to play for, a great fan base. They are the glitz and glamour of New York without the side effect of playing for the Yankees. So that is a plus side. So this feels like the culmination of a lot of things for the Mets, and I hope the Mets fans are able to appreciate how great of a feeling this is going to be this offseason.
and never take it for granted. And so let's look at the offseason for the Mets because they've been linked to a bunch of these free agents here. Most recently, the guy that I have seen probably closest linked to the Mets and who I guess at this point is most likely is George Springer, who has been the Astros outfielder for several years, who is really, really good and could help the Mets out a lot. A little on the older side, but you're really paying for the front end of that contract. Dylan, I'll turn this over to you. As you look at the free agent landscape, you look at what the Mets could do, whether it's free agency, trades, whatever the case may be. What are you looking for out of the New York Mets between now and when they report for spring training in February?
Between now and spring training, all I am looking for is one big acquisition that we would not have seen in a previous year. That's all Steve Cohen has to do this offseason, I think, to not only is solidify his stature, but also make it very clear to Mets fans to say, I wasn't messing around when I said the things I said. When I said 3 to 5 years for a championship, I meant 3 to 5 years. That is all he has to do. No one's expecting the Mets to win the World Series this year. But if Steve Cohen really wants to prove to not only Mets fans, but all of baseball that the Mets are here to play, that's all he has to do. One big acquisition, whether that be George Springer, whether that be Trevor Bauer, or these names that we keep hearing. It really is just the regular free agent class. And that's what's great is that the Mets fans are not used to the entire free agent class being potential acquisitions. All Cohen has to do between now and when we hope spring training starts in February is just get one of those guys to become a New York Met. All you got to do.
Dylan, I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyway. You follow Steve Cohen on Twitter, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good. Everybody follows Steve Cohen on Twitter. He's great. And a reporter had tweeted out that there was sort of an insight about how candidates for the GM spot were sort of taken aback that he had set out such an aggressive timeline. And look, 3 to 5 years, is it aggressive? Yes, it is a little aggressive, but it's finally good to hear aggressive talk out of the New York Mets, and not the come get us after you go and get Jed Lowry and he never plays for them, but bravado that can actually be backed up by dollars, basically. So anyway, this reporter had gleaned that some candidates were taken aback and maybe turned away from the Mets a little bit because of that timeline. And Steve Cohen responded. He said, well, who wants them if we're not going to have big goals? And I said, this is the exact right mindset the New York Mets need to have, that the goals are big. It's not meaningful baseball in September. It's not, maybe we're going to contend for a wild card spot. It's, look, we're a big market team. We're going to behave like a big market team, and we're going to go out here and win. And, look, maybe they don't win a World Series in the next 3 to 5 years. Who knows? But the mindset's in the right place. And I think more than any player they go out and get, more than anything they do this offseason, I think that's probably the most encouraging thing that Mets fans can look forward to under the Steve Cohen regime.
Absolutely. My questioning to the doubters, if this reporter happens to be right and they do exist in the GM world, is why would you doubt that? This is the biggest market in the United States. This is an owner that has quite a bit of dough to his name. Why would you not be aggressive? I also don't think we hear 3 to 5 and we think, oh my goodness, this guy thinks he's George Steinbrenner. I don't think that's that aggressive of a timeline. To be honest with you, if I were a fan of any major league team, I'd want my ownership to be saying we want to win a championship in the next 3 to 5 years. If your goal as a franchise, if the position you're in right now is not aiming to win a championship in the next 3 to 5 years. Are you waiting 10 years? What are you doing? I think 3 to 5 years is it was jarring for Mets fans to hear because we've not heard chat of this uh, since we last woke up from our last fantasy. Um, so this is I don't think it's as aggressive and as forthcoming as certain people in the media are making it out to be. I think this is a guy who has a lot of confidence in what he's able to do because he's in a big market and he's got the money to spend. And there's people who want to come play for the New York Mets because this is a fun franchise and this is a great fan base. I I don't understand why 3 to 5 years to win a championship was so alarming to hear from an owner.
I think it was only alarming to hear because they don't usually say it out loud like
Precisely.
that. Like I think everyone in the back of their mind has that goal, and you can change the numbers around a little bit. But to hear him come out and just, it seemed like on the spot because the reporter asked like, "How soon do you want to do it?" And he kind of rolled his eyes. And was like, "Well, you know, I mean, I guess 3 to 5 years." And it was like, "Okay, let's do it." Um, Complicating things slightly for the Mets right now. They do not have a GM. That's going to be important at some point. They need to do that. They're taking their time with the process. I don't have any like huge concerns about it. They were unable to hire a president of baseball operations because, as they found out the hard way, they needed to get permission to talk to a lot of those people. That's not as easy as it seems, and that just did wind up working out for them. But Sandy Alderson's running the ship. He's going to hire a GM. That guy's going to run things. Sandy Alderson's still going to be involved. But you look at the Mets. They're bringing back Luis Rojas as their manager. Is this a team as you look at them? I'm curious about this. How close do you think the Mets are right now, include the Trevor May signing from yesterday, to being where they want to be among contenders in the National League and also for the championship?
Can I include the Zach Wheeler signing from about an hour ago? No, I'm kidding. So
You had me for a second.
um, I think um, I think 4 years is completely reasonable. I really do. Um, and I think just the fact that this new ownership was going after people to take over roles when they didn't even realize that there are a process to go by, it became very clear that that aggression that we saw apparently when Steve Cohen said 3 to 5 years to win a championship is much is runs much deeper than your first press conference. It is all hands on deck. And why not? This is a team that has talent already. This is a team that, us being in the area, we know this well enough, but there are some really talented guys on this team. And it's a team that has shown sparks of potential over the last few years, specifically in 2019. And of course there's work to be done. Of course there's work to be done. But I don't think it's more than 3 to 4 years worth of work to get done before a World Series is within reach. So I think, let's get the average of what Steve Cohen said. So 4 years. I would say 4 years.
I mean, Sandy Alderson said they're more than a player away. He's right on that.
Mhm.
You and I both watched the Mets last year. I mean, how many games did they either blow in their bullpen or not even be in the first place because their starting rotation just blew it for them by the third inning?
Yeah.
So are they a player away? No. But if you can go out this offseason and get a franchise-changing guy, whether that's Springer or Bauer or even Lindor, which seems like a long shot at this point, you can go out and get somebody like that. Might be talking sooner than 4 years. I think 2 to 3 could be done. Yeah, I don't think I mean I don't think this team is knocking on the door, but I also don't think they're crazy far away from doing this. They don't need to go through a rebuild. They have a bunch of really good pieces at the big league level. They're probably going to extend Michael Conforto at some point, who looks like a stud. They almost have, in some ways, at least in the lineup, almost too many guys right now, which is a good problem to have. It could be done. It could be done, and I'm more bullish on this than you are. I don't think they're as far away. I think they go out and get somebody who can, be an anchor in the middle of that lineup this offseason. Go out, get some starting pitching help. They're not that far off. And, if they put good infrastructure in place in the front office, then I would say 2 to 3 years. I think it can happen. I think it can happen. And I say all this with a grain of salt, being a Mets fan all my life. Believe me, I know. But there's reason for optimism and there's reason for confidence. That's something that I know you and I have not had about this team for a long, long time.
No. And what was interesting about the 2015 Mets is that they were an example of a team that I did not have confidence in, truly. And then they bested my expectations for some weird reason. But now, in the last couple of years, there's been examples of the opposite, where you go, oh, I have higher expectations for this team, and then they don't meet them. So this will be a mending of the two whenever it comes to fruition.
You know what I've got to say to that?
What?
Come get us. We've got a few more minutes left talking about escrow and other matters when we come back. Stay with us. A little over 10 minutes left here on One. Jimmy and Dylan with you here on YouTube and Twitter. Again, leave a comment if you want to chime in on anything we are talking about. So we've been talking about a lot of different stuff this show. The common thread, unfortunately, has been COVID. And as part of that, the National Hockey League is trying to figure out a way to both safely return for the 2021 season and also do so in a way that makes everyone happy financially. As we saw from Major League Baseball this past summer, that's not easy. And the NHL is running into similar roadblocks. The latest on the situation comes today, a report from ESPN.com. Basically, the two sides are fighting. Don't need me to tell you that. But what is happening, in essence, is that the owners have asked for additional sources of cash flow at the expense of the players. One of those is something called escrow, which is basically a mechanism by which players have to put money into a mutual escrow account is what it's called. And then a certain degree of that money comes back to them, assuming the NHL revenues are good. Forgive me, that was not the best definition of it, but I'm I'm also not a Gabelli boy, so
Right. You are no economer.
that's so that's the strategery on the NFL side, the NHL side. NFL, goodness me. Anyway, the players obviously were not happy about this. They felt betrayed. They negotiated their deals in a certain way in free agency this year, and that is being betrayed right now by the owners. They don't like it. Basically, there's two options here for the NHL: a bigger hit this year that allows the league to get back on its feet quicker, or a more protracted hit that is less sudden for the players and less of an initial decrease. Dylan, the lay of the land in hockey right now, not very good. They need to figure out a way to return to play. And we said this with baseball. It's one thing if it's just not safe to play because of the virus and its prevalence. It's another thing if you can figure out a way to do it health wise and can't do it economically. The NHL is staring door number 2 square in the face right now, and that's a scary proposition for hockey fans.
Yeah, the National Hockey League proved, I would say, with flying colors for most of their the second half of their season, if you will, that they knew how to handle this. Um, moving every team that was going to play up to Canada, having two strict bubbles, and I think it was the last 7-8 weeks of that season, not a single positive test. That's crazy. And it proved not only to the NHL specifically them, but really to all the sports, like there is a way to do this, and it's an indoor sport. But that being said, we talk about the NFL gets a lot of flack whenever there is labor discord, of owners being greedy and trying to scam the players. But every 5 or 6 years, the NHL has a labor dispute. And at least from our perspective, obviously neither you nor I are an insider into what's going on in those negotiations right now. But it usually seems, especially in the NHL, like the owners are trying to scam the Players Association. And that's what we're seeing again right now. So I hope the players continue to stand their ground and say, hey, look, it's not that we don't want to play hockey, but you're making this incredibly difficult, much more difficult than this has to be. And I'm sure everyone is worrying about not just this season, but the next season, because next season would hopefully potentially be when things get back to normal in terms of scheduling and in terms of just about everything. So it is certainly something to worry about, but if the reports that we've heard are to be believed, I'm with the players here.
I tend to be too. And when the NBA was figuring out how to come back for this season, and by the way, they are going to have their own issues with the plan that they have because they're doing cross-country travel and all that stuff that's probably not going to work. But they were trying to figure out a way to come back, and the players didn't want to come back until January. The owner said, we want you back in December. And Michelle Roberts, who is the head of the Basketball Players Association, who is about as cool of a head as there is out there in terms of labor negotiations in sports, went to the players and said, look, here's the deal. You can wait till January. You're going to lose money. And that kind of spurred the players to say, okay, we'll deal with coming back in December. The head of the NHL Players Association is Don Fehr. Don Fehr is the only person in the history of major professional sports to preside over work stoppages in 2 different sports. Not that it's necessarily his fault.
Yeah.
But Don Fehr is no Michelle Roberts. And, yes, it's a different situation. The owners seem to have more of an interest in actually meeting the players in the middle in basketball, where they do not seem to have that interest in the NHL. And you can see that by the contract values. But who's going to be that cooler head here? I don't know. When Major League Baseball went through its shenanigans last summer, and it was horrible, at gut level, all of us knew that eventually they would work it out. Didn't know what the health and safety was going to look like, but economically, they will work something out. That's not a guarantee here. I feel a different vibe with this, and maybe it's because the NHL is still the last league to cancel a season because of a lockout, but this does not feel like that to me, and I'll be interested to see how this ends up.
Certainly. I think I'm sure there is uh, there's fault to be had on either side of this issue. The truth lies between their two beliefs somewhere. But I think now that NHL players know that there is a viable and safe way to go about at least some of the season. We didn't see this happen for an 82 game season and then 4 rounds of playoffs. We didn't see that. We saw some of it, but we did not see all of that. Nevertheless, they saw that in most ways it can be done fairly safely. So that being said, I think that allows NHL players, as a players association, to kind of sit back a little more and go, you're still kind of putting us at risk. We are not going to risk ourselves to come back sooner so that you as the owners can make an extra buck. So it's incredibly difficult, but I worry because the NHL is not the most consistent in finding labor peace. They weren't when they locked out in 05-06, and they were not in what I believe was 2011, 2012, or was it 2012-13? Can't remember. When they almost lost their season. Didn't, but almost did. So I worry, but I do think things are going to be fine.
I hope so. And there's also another matter we need to talk about here.
Mm-hmm.
So the NBA has the Raptors in Toronto. They're playing to at least start their season in Tampa.
Yeah.
The NBA has 1 team in Canada. The NHL has 7. I don't know how that works, to be honest with you. It's easy to relocate 1 team, or at least it's easy enough to do it to all of them. That's a much tougher proposition. And I don't know exactly how all that'll work out. I've heard discussions that they'll have some kind of bubble where those 7 teams just play each other over and over again. I mean, how realistic is that? I don't know.
It also just, I'll say, it sounds dumb. That sounds really dumb.
And Canada, I mean, let's also be honest. Canada has not been receptive to, allowing Americans over the border, and for good reason. So I don't see that attitude just changing overnight. But they got to figure it out. Quite frankly, they finished the season in a really positive way. They were able to crown a champion when not all of us were sold that was going to work. Them and the NBA came back basically the same time, and they got it done. And you can say whatever you want about Gary Bettman or the leadership in that sport, but you have to give them a ton of credit with the way they ended last season with virtually no positive tests after a certain point. And, you would put the kibosh on that momentum so quickly by having a work stoppage here. It's the dumbest possible route, and I just hope to God that they don't take it.
I hope they don't take it either, but I'm certainly worried that they will. Because this is, like we've said, this is a league that has not shown consistency in being able to get it done. For whatever reason, they were able to get it done before the madness of a COVID summer of sports, if you will. But that's not enough to sell for me that this is going to happen.
Well, I hope not, but yeah, you can never be sold. Listen, we covered a lot of ground tonight. That was We did like everything.
We really did.
Well, maybe not everything. That's a stretch. But
yeah, but we covered most everything. If you're not satisfied, viewers, with the amount we covered tonight, please tell us in the comments, because we want to know. And I promise I will read every one of them, and I myself will respond to every single one of them. You have my word on it.
Send a letter, send a postcard, send an email, whatever it is the kids do nowadays. Just go ahead and do it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Our thanks to our producer, Alex Wools, sports director at WFUV. It is Bobby Chaffardini for my partner, Dylan Balsamo. I am Jimmy Sullivan. Have a safe and happy rest of your week. We'll see you next time.